these people, although they carry the gene, sometimes it's not by their own volition. Sometimes it's pusaka, it's like an inheritance where because their ancestors had it, it will just follow the next generation. After the ancestor passed on, it will just go on to the next generation, whether they wanted it or not.
Is there anyone here? What did you find?
You are listening to Supernatural Confessions.
Subsequently, after the completion of my housemanship, I elected to go to Hospital Lahad Datu, which is on the eastern side of Borneo. So you have the dog's head, which is Sabah, so it's near to the dog's muzzle. Why Lahad Datu? Because before the end of my housemanship, there was an incursion by the Sultanate of Sulu. What happened was the Sultanate of Sulu claimed that Sabah belonged to them, and they want the Malaysian government to pay them royalties. The Malaysian government denied this historical fact, and then so the Sultanate of Sulu decided to invade Borneo to claim what is theirs. So somewhere towards the last few months of 2013, there was an incursion. So I'll call them Sulu pirates. They invaded, and then there was a shootout between the Sulu pirates and the police force of Lahad Datu. There was rumored to be a second invasion sometime in the Christmas of 2013, and I wanted to be part of the action, so I volunteered to go there. During my time there, things were peaceful. The second invasion didn't come about, but I had a few experiences there. I was staying in the hostel at the time, and then I went home to have a shower, my dinner, and then going back to the hospital. I was based in the hospital throughout the night. So as I was walking towards the hostel, upon reaching one of the junctions, the street lamp started flickering. I had a bad feeling at the time, but I couldn't quite explain it. Then I hurried to my hostel. Just in front of the hostel, there's a parking lot, and there's also a dumpster, quite large. So I was expecting pungent smells, like rotting smells, whatever. But curiously, there were none, and I was walking. Immediately when I was in front of the dumpster, suddenly there was a very strong scent of jasmine. So as I was walking right in front of the dumpster, there was absolutely no smell before then, but when I was right in front of it, suddenly there was a very, very strong scent of jasmine. I had goosebumps, and I straight away ran up the staircase to my hostel, had my dinner, shower, and decided to head back to my hospital. I decided to avoid the mortuary section that evening, and I decided to take another path. I was passing by the pharmacy store when I heard a loud noise of people moving heavy furniture. I paused, and then I told myself that I must really be imagining things. So I took another 2 steps, then I heard it another time. And I looked at the pharmacy store, it was pitch black, but then I decided to run for it. I ran to my medical ward and told the nurse about my experience that preceding my arrival to the ward. So she told me that, Doctor, didn't you know? I said, no what? And she said, you know about the Sulu incursion, right? You know there were so many bodies, and there was not enough place to place all the bodies that they converted the pharmacy store into a temporary mortuary. I'm like, oh shit, yeah. Another incident was the internal medicine wards. I was a medical officer in the internal medicine ward, and then there was isolation room for patients with infectious disease, most commonly tuberculosis. There's this young Malay gentleman in his 20s who had hemoptysis. He was coughing up blood, and so before we could clear him out of isolations, he need to test negative for 3 samples of phlegm that clear of TB before he can be de-isolated. One of the morning rounds, and when he was in there, my specialist asked me, said, Kuan Yew, what you do to him lah? Why he so angry looking inside there? So because he's in isolation, every day only one person will go in with the N95 mask, and then the rest of it stay outside. I'm not sure what's going on, so I look at my senior and I asked him, Gordon, what's going on? And he said that, oh, don't worry, you'll find out later. I'm like, what the? Okay. So he said that what you can do is to trace up the samples fast, because last time it's not electronic. You have to call the lab. Sometimes there will be a time lag before they send the results to the ward. So if you want the result fast, you call them, and then they'll tell you whether it's positive or negative. If 3 subsequent negatives, then he can be de-isolated. So that gentleman, 3 samples were negative. He exited and then he came to the main ward. Then I decided to ask him, what happened inside there? Why were you like always so angry looking? He said that, please doctor, don't ever send me in there. And he said that, my first night in there, so there were 4 beds. My first night in there, my empty bed next to me, someone was lying in there. On my second night, I'm sleeping in front of the bathroom. Somebody is bathing there, but that person was floating and is bathing in blood. And the third night, I got possessed, and you can ask your nurse. And indeed, subsequently, I checked my nurse that the previous night, they actually called a bomo to come to exorcise the spirit because that patient was possessed. With that history, I informed my senior medical officer. He told me yes. He said that yes, that place is known to be so, and the previous patient that stayed there was a paraplegic, and things got so haywire inside there that he crawled out of the room because he couldn't stand it anymore. Yeah. The last part of strange encounters in Hospital Lahad Datu was the ICU. One day I was escorting a patient from the medical ward to the ICU. The patient was stable throughout. We arrived in the ICU. There were 6 beds, but only 2 were occupied. So this will be the 3rd patient occupying the beds. Since the transfer was uneventful, I started exploring ICU, like looking at patients' charts and things like that. When suddenly I heard a voice calling me, Dr. Yong. Then I looked, and then I looked at my nurses. They were handing over, so there were no one that can call me. But I did not think much and think that it could be my imagination. Then a few days later, I met with the medical officer stationed in the ICU. So he was telling me about this patient that was aphasic. He couldn't speak. What would happen is that sometimes during the rounds, he would suddenly sit upright, and he would look directly past the shoulder of my friend as if he was looking at something there. My friend would get really unnerved. He would help the patient rest, and then we'll sedate him. When I heard that story, so I told him about my experience hearing my name being called. So we came to the conclusion was it the thing that was calling my name, what the patient actually saw? And then at that time, I was also, on hindsight, I kind of heard that voice actually came from under the hospital bed, and it's not like at our usual level. So that was one of the stories of Lahad Datu. Yep. Yeah. I also recall some stories from Kota Kinabalu. There, we have a lot of patients. We call them UR. UR is unregistered. Basically, they live in the island of Pulau Gaya, and then they don't have IC. But usually, when they come into the hospital, they are really sick. A lot of these citizens are just for general knowledge sake, that a lot of these people now become citizens of Malaysia. We say it's Mahathir's Project IC lah. Yeah. Anyway, back to the story. So there will be quite a lot of practitioners of black magic that we will come across during our work. Many of them have charm needles. So let's say they come in for an accident, and when you take X-rays, you'll find needles over the cheeks, usually gold needles. And what's it for? Some say it's for health. Some say so that they get married to a wealthy family or things like that. Some of the marginalized communities over there, they do manual labor, hard labor, carrying sacks of rice or other groceries, weighing 30 kilos, but they are very low wage earners. They don't have enough nutrition in their diet, and what they do to cope with their work is they seek out black magic practitioners that give them the strength to perform this type of work, and that's what the charm needles do as well. Some of them have talismans which they wear, and it actually makes them invincible. My dentist colleague, so she also told me about one of her patients where she was trying to extract his teeth, and then no matter how she pulled his teeth in all directions, she couldn't remove it. Then she said that I think I may need you to come back another time because I'm not sure what's going on, but I cannot extract your tooth. It's bad. It's supposed to come out. Then the guy said, "Oh, give me 1 second." Then he stood up. He removed his amulet and said that, "Why don't you try that again?" And then poof, and then she took the tooth out. It's like, what the hell? Yeah, that was one of them. Also weird stuff that may not be so supernatural. There's this guy who was also one of the pirates lah. So he came in. He had meningism, inflammation of the brain, and then he required an MRI. After the MRI, after he returned, he had difficulty passing urine. And then that time I had to insert a urinary catheter for him. Then I realized that there are weird growths around his prepuce, his foreskin. And then when I asked some senior nurses and doctors, then they told me that, oh, they implant ball bearings there to pleasure their partners. And we were just glad that during the MRI machine, those metal ball bearings did not fly out. Then there were other stories of patients who cannot die. They were like super terminally ill, but then they would just go on and then hang there between life and death. And then what will happen is the family members during this period, they will go into the interiors of Sabah, find the witch doctor that helped implant whatever being into that person. After they did a ceremony by the bedside, only then can this person pass on peacefully. These people, although they carry the gene, sometimes it's not by their own volition. Sometimes it's pusaka, it's like an inheritance where because their ancestors had it, it will just follow the next generation. After the ancestor passed on, it will just go on to the next generation, whether they wanted it or not. For the balan-balan also, some of them I've been told that it's also not their own volition. It's also came with them when they came to this world because of being inherited from their parents. Yeah, a lot of such stories. So for your expanded version of Supernatural Confessions, please go to Sabah. Yeah. Sort of a taboo for the nurses. They would hate to transfuse blood after 5 p.m. because if they transfuse blood after 5 p.m. and then it happens in the night, what's going to happen is usually we prime the blood transfusions to go for 4 hours because we don't want to overload the vascular system. So 4 hours, warm blood, and when they do it at night, what's going to happen is the blood will finish transfusion despite being primed using we call it B-bron infosomat. The blood will just finish, the transfusion would end in 1 hour. And then what the nurses would say is that usually you will have remnants of blood inside the tubing, but when these things happen, even the tubing will be squeaky clean. There will be no blood inside. And then for such cases, if it happened, the next day when you check the recipient of the blood transfusion, the hemoglobin would not have increased at all. Yeah, so they say that doctor, please don't transfuse blood at night. Do it next morning if it's not urgent. That would be the common plea that you hear in all the wards. Yeah.
Is anyone here? What did you find?
You are listening to Supernatural Confessions.